The air in the subterranean briefing room was not merely cool, it was stagnant, thick with the metallic scent of ozone drifting from the humming server racks recessed behind acoustic paneling, overlaid with the stale, acidic aroma of countless hours of burnt coffee. Outside the heavily armored doors, a planetary crisis was reaching its zenith, a flashpoint known only in classified circles as the X-Crisis, threatening to tip global stability into a geopolitical abyss. Inside this insulated chamber, however, the temperature remained fixed, a manufactured 20 degrees Celsius, designed to promote clarity and suppress human fatigue. It achieved neither. The 12 figures assembled around the elongated mahogany table, polished to a reflective sheen that distorted the overhead fluorescent banks, were palpably weary. Etched with the strain of watching data streams promise one conclusion, only to snatch it away moments later. They had gathered here seeking the one commodity that intelligence analysis rarely provides: absolute certainty. For 72 hours, the primary command structure had existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the definitive assessment that would illuminate the intentions of the opposing power, known only internally as the Eastern Bloc proxy. The expectation, heavily weighted by recent aggressive posturing, was grim but clear. A confirmation of imminent, large-scale hostile action, demanding an immediate and calculated response. Instead of clarity, what arrived were 5 separate, highly classified reports, each delivered with objective certainty, yet forming a perfect analytical circle of confusion. Each report carried the seal of an independent analytical division, rigorous in its methodology, yet utterly incompatible with its fellows. The logistical challenge of presenting this contradictory array was formidable. The briefing officer, a major general known for his unflappable demeanor, arranged the 5 binders, each of a different color, reflecting the originating directorate, at intervals down the table, equidistant monuments to analytical friction. He did not look triumphant. He looked medically bewildered. The paralysis began the moment the first report was opened. The first assessment, identified by its heavy cardstock binding and the bright crimson tab affixed to its spine, originated from the Imagery Analysis and Kinetic Modeling Directorate, commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sky. Its title was stark: Immediate Escalation Window Confirmed. The presentation was deliberately physical and visually assaulting. Large, glossy printouts were distributed, detailing specific movements across the desolate, frost-choked frontier zone, the precise locus of the X-Crisis tension.
The images, processed satellite telemetry, were hauntingly clear, stripped of atmospheric interference, showing the granular details of operational readiness.
The analyst presenting Report 1, a woman whose voice carried the precise, arid certainty of the mathematics she specialized in, pointed to overlays projected onto the high-resolution screen at the end of the room. The imagery detailed the deployment patterns of mechanized infantry, not in defensive postures, but in specific, assault-oriented formations. The shadows were scrutinized, revealing the precise moment supply trains stalled, not for maintenance, but for the rapid offloading of specialized bridging equipment, a logistical precursor that signaled movement across major hydrological barriers. The quantification is indisputable, the analyst stated, tapping a laser pointer against a section of the digital map detailing a forward operating base. We are tracking a 92% readiness correlation with historical patterns preceding their largest regional maneuver exercises in the past decade. Crucially, we observe a 24-hour acceleration in the arming sequence of their long-range artillery batteries. This is not saber rattling or a drill designed for optics. This is the tightening of the spring mechanism. Based on fuel consumption rates and personnel rotation schedules, we project an optimal kinetic launch window of 72 hours, decreasing rapidly. The report detailed truck counts, camouflage netting changes, and the digital signatures of command and control activation sequences that had lain dormant for months. It was a masterpiece of pattern recognition, utilizing proprietary algorithms to strip away the noise and identify the clear, objective mechanics of war mobilization. The texture of the data felt cold, hard, and irrefutable, suggesting a massive, coordinated intent backed by palpable capability. The conclusion, stated plainly on the final slide, was that the opposing power was committed, capable, and rapidly approaching the point of no return. The required response, according to the kinetic modeling, was immediate, large-scale counter-mobilization to deter the perceived invasion. The atmosphere thickened with the recognition of imminent danger. Decisions needed to be made immediately, relying on the certainty provided by the infallible optics of orbiting intelligence platforms. The tension generated by Report 1 was absolute, a consensus rapidly forming around the need for decisive, preemptive action. Then, the Major General shifted the crimson binder aside and introduced the sapphire blue assessment. Report 2. Report 2 was the intellectual antithesis of Report 1, originating from the Psychological Profiling and Behavioral Analysis Unit, the division that specialized in reading the minds of commanders through the filters of their cultural and systemic deficiencies. It offered an entirely opposed view, arguing not for aggressive capability, but for imminent internal collapse driven by systemic resource depletion. The analyst presenting this segment was markedly different, less focused on equipment and logistics, and more attuned to the intangible metrics of human stress. He spoke of historical context, of the inherent fragility of centralized authoritarian structures when placed under sustained external pressure. The core of Report 2 centered on detailed psychological profiles of 5 senior opposing commanders, men whose careers had spanned decades of rigid hierarchy and dwindling internal support. "We are observing clear systemic exhaustion," the analyst explained, projecting 5 heavily annotated headshots of the commanders. Look at the texture of the decision-making process. Report 1 shows aggressive deployment, yes. But our analysis shows a lack of logistical sustainability required for a prolonged campaign. The mobilization is a theatrical response to internal resource depletion, a desperation move. The data here was soft, derived from intercepted communications that were less about strategy and more about bureaucratic anxiety. The unit analyzed lexical choices, frequency of communication breakdowns, and the documented health issues of the command structure. It depicted isolated, weary commanders, desperate to save face, utilizing the only tool they had left, the appearance of force. The report elaborated on the deep fractures within the opposing regime's supply chain, citing documented evidence of chronic fuel shortages. Endemic corruption bleeding dry the military budget, and rapidly degrading morale among mid-level officers who felt betrayed by their leadership. The aggressive movements cited in the first report are a strategic bluff, the analysis concluded. They are high-risk gestures aimed at 2 audiences, their own increasingly restless populace and us. They need a crisis to justify tightening internal controls and diverting resources away from civilian sectors. If we meet force with force now, we give them the rallying cry they desperately require to delay the inevitable implosion. Our strategy must be patience and the application of sustained, non-kinetic pressure to accelerate the systemic failure already underway. They are hollow, and their leaders are merely attempting to appear strong as the walls collapse. The contradiction hung heavy in the artificially conditioned air. How could a military capable of the precision detailed in Report 1 also be simultaneously teetering on the brink of systemic psychological collapse, as argued by Report 2? Both reports were rigorous, yet mutually exclusive. The assembly shifted uncomfortably, the certainty gained from the kinetic assessment dissolving rapidly into a viscous uncertainty. The conflict deepened further with the introduction of Report 3, bound in a dense, unassuming forest green cover. This was a purely technical assessment from the Signals Intelligence and Telemetry Directorate, a dense stack of raw, objective data that fundamentally refuted the operational capabilities assumed in Report 1. Report 3 was the voice of cold, non-human probability. It did not care about psychology or intent. It cared only about the statistical viability of aging machinery. The Signals Directorate had compiled months of intercepted electronic emissions, detailing the telemetry fingerprints of the Eastern Bloc proxy's key operational platforms. The briefing was dry, saturated with complex probability distributions and failure rate curves. The technician, dressed in the slightly rumpled attire common to those who spend their lives talking to machines, used graphs that spiked and plunged with mathematical mercilessness. He detailed the critical failure rates of the enemy's aging armored division equipment, their primary mechanized force. "We are tracking catastrophic thermal signatures across their primary tank fleet," the technician reported, clicking through diagrams of engine schematics. "The service life has been exceeded by an average of 35% across 57% of the active deployment pool. We are seeing intermittent guidance system failure on their short-range ballistic missiles, confirmed by the telemetry jitter captured during their most recent publicized test launch. A 70% success rate is mathematically insufficient for a strategic first strike capability." Report 3 essentially reduced the enemy's hardware into a liability spreadsheet. It argued that while they possessed the intent described in Report 1, and perhaps the desperation described in Report 2, they utterly lacked the functional capability to execute a successful large-scale invasion. The density of the raw data, the milliseconds of latency, the precise statistical deviation from optimal performance was overwhelming. It demonstrated that if the opposing force attempted the rapid maneuver detailed in the satellite images, a significant portion of their vehicles would simply break down en route, choking their own supply lines and turning the offensive into an administrative disaster. To commit to the aggressive posture detailed in the Crimson Report, the technician concluded, his voice monotone, would be suicidal for their command structure. Their operational capability has been critically degraded by resource mismanagement, as confirmed by the mechanical evidence. The probability of sustained operational tempo beyond 48 hours is less than 5%, regardless of their initial surge. Now, the command structure was faced with three competing, expert-verified realities. They are mobilizing aggressively and are capable. Report 1. 2. They are bluffing due to internal collapse, demanding patience. Report 2. 3. They are mathematically incapable of executing a sustained attack. Report 3. The mahogany table felt less like a surface for collaboration and more like a battlefield where certainty itself was the casualty. The figures around the table began arguing amongst themselves, voices low but edged with increasing frustration. The director of intelligence leaned forward, rubbing his temples. The faint hum of the servers seeming to mock their collective inability to synthesize. This intellectual deadlock was interrupted by the presentation of Report 4, contained within a slim, unassuming gray folder. This was the most delicate of all, intelligence gathered through a highly sensitive human asset operating deep within the enemy capital. Report 4 spoke not of hardware, statistics, or broad psychological profiles, but of a localized, pervasive, quiet fear settling over the capital city. Focusing intensely on organizational paralysis and morale collapse at the civilian and mid-military levels. The document was a narrative, a patchwork of whispers and objective observations from the streets, the government offices, and the military barracks far from the kinetic frontier. The presentation was delivered by the liaison for the Human Intelligence Directorate, whose specialty lay in the art of extracting truth from the chaos of human interaction. She focused on the atmosphere, the texture of life under the opposing regime. "Our asset reporting indicates a profound stagnation," she stated, speaking softly, almost conversationally. The aggression seen on the frontier is utterly disconnected from the reality of the capital. We are documenting routine bureaucratic delays reaching unprecedented levels. Permits are frozen. Supply chains are severed, not by enemy action, but by official reluctance to sign off on anything that might later be deemed treasonous if the political winds shift. The report detailed the sensory observations of the asset, the lack of movement on major infrastructure projects, the sudden disappearance of mid-level officials who had previously been aggressive advocates for the conflict, and the palpable tension among ordinary citizens queuing for staple goods. Not panic, but a grim, quiet resignation. The emphasis is on fear, not fervor, the liaison continued. Report 2 suggested weariness in the commanders. Report 4 confirms organizational paralysis driven by terror of failure. No one wants to be the last person standing when the entire structure falls. They are actively suppressing information, fearing the consequences of reporting bad news.
This results in a massive disconnect. The front line prepares based on old directives, while the capital attempts to make itself invisible, waiting for the political storm to pass.
The key takeaway is not that they are unable to fight. It's that they are currently unwilling to commit resources due to overwhelming internal political risk. This narrative intelligence complicated the picture further. If the capital was paralyzed by fear, Report 4, why was the front line mobilizing aggressively? Report 1. Was the aggression merely the momentum of a machine that could not be stopped once started, even if the driver was gone? Was Report 1 showing movement that was autonomous rather than directed? The command structure now had 4 plausible, conflicting realities, each supported by rigorous, verifiable data streams: aggression, desperation, mechanical failure, and internal paralysis. The room had fallen into a deep, agonizing silence, broken only by the scratching sound of the note-takers. The concept of a single, unifying truth had fragmented into a kaleidoscope of possibility, and with it, the capacity for clear decision-making evaporated. The danger was no longer the enemy's intent, but the paralysis induced by overwhelming information overload. It was into this analytical void that the fifth and most unsettling intelligence summary materialized. This late-arriving synthesis was bound in stark, unadorned black cardstock, delivered by a messenger who waited just outside the door, refusing to enter the fray. Report 5 originated from the Strategic Counter-Deception and Synthesis Directorate, the unit responsible for meta-analysis, whose job was to assume that everything else was wrong, or worse, deliberately manipulated. This report proposed a chilling hypothesis that the preceding 4 data streams were not errors, but elements of a meticulously constructed, deliberate feint. A large-scale strategic deception designed to provoke an overreaction. The brief was delivered by the director of the synthesis unit herself, an analyst with a reputation for merciless intellectual rigor. She did not use slides or graphs. She used cold logic to connect the disparate analytical nodes. We must consider the possibility that all preceding data, the kinetic movements, the psychological profiles, the telemetry failure rates, and the human intelligence narrative, are coordinated elements of a strategic deception campaign, she stated, her voice quiet but commanding, overriding the lingering tension. This is the definition of a masterful fiction, crafting a reality that, when viewed through multiple independent lenses, appears contradictory, leading to exactly the state we are currently in: immobilization. She elaborated on the historical precedents of strategic deception, particularly the concept of generating noise that is too precise to ignore. If Report 1, aggression, is true, we must respond kinetically. But if the opposing power knows we prioritize kinetic intelligence, they can generate high-fidelity, aggressive visual data that is operationally meaningless. They can move material to the frontier simply to generate the signature detected by the eye of the sky. knowing our algorithms will scream imminent attack. This requires no genuine intent to launch an assault, only the intent to force our mobilization and exhaust our own resources. She then addressed Report 3, Incapability. The raw telemetry data on equipment failure, the numbers that show their tanks are breaking down, is highly effective camouflage. If we believe their equipment is statistically incapable of operation, we hesitate. But that data can be deliberately corrupted, leaked, or simply represent the performance of older decoy units placed within the signaling grid. The opponent uses our own mathematical certainty against us, demonstrating a fatal flaw that prevents action. The synthesis then folded in the softer data. If we receive reports of internal collapse, Report 2, and organizational paralysis, Report 4, we are encouraged to remain patient, relying on their inevitable implosion. This creates the optimal window for the opposing power to move. They generate the appearance of weakness and desperation, knowing that a patient adversary is a static target. Report 5 posited that the Eastern Bloc proxy had constructed a perfect analytical labyrinth. They showed aggression to alarm the kinetic analysts. They showed weakness to encourage the behavioral analysts. And they showed mechanical failure to satisfy the signals directorate. Each specialized directorate, operating independently with its rigorous protocols, had been fed a tailored truth. And because the source material was genuine, actual satellite images of movement, actual intercepted anxiety, actual statistical failure rates, the analyst stamped the intelligence as verified. The deception is multispectral, the synthesis director concluded. It does not rely on a single lie, but on a constellation of truths that, when taken together, negate each other. We are immobilized because we cannot discern verifiable fact from masterful fiction. The operation is designed not to make us act, but to make us fail to act decisively. Our greatest vulnerability is not the enemy's capability, but our inherent requirement for certainty before commitment. The effect of Report 5 was immediate and profound. It did not resolve the X crisis. It merely revealed the depth of the trap. The command structure was faced with the ultimate intelligence conundrum. 4 plausible, rigorous conclusions pointing to 4 different courses of action, all of which could potentially be rendered fatal by the overarching possibility that they were all elements of a singular, brilliant act of strategic theater. The silence that followed was heavy, not with the anticipation of war, but with the dawning realization of intellectual impotence. The scent of ozone and burnt coffee seemed suddenly inadequate to mask the corrosive nature of the data fog now enveloping the room. Decision-making requires a foundational assessment of reality, but reality had been intentionally fractured. Presented to the command structure as a series of impeccable reflections in broken glass. The Major General finally spoke, his voice dry and hollow, articulating the collective failure. We possess perfect knowledge of 5 different universes, and we have no means of verification to determine which universe we currently inhabit. The meeting adjourned without consensus. The operational response, mandated by the threat level, was stalled. The command structure found itself suspended in a temporal zone between certainty and catastrophe. Unable to mobilize against a kinetic threat, Report 1, for fear of falling for a feint, Report 5. Unable to rely on internal collapse, Reports 2 and 4, for fear of being surprised by a fully capable force. And unable to trust the mathematics of failure, Report 3, for fear that the true capabilities were being concealed by decoy telemetry. The incident of the 5 contradictory reports became a highly classified case study in intelligence paralysis, a testament to the inherent danger when certainty fragments into a kaleidoscope of possibility, transforming data overload from a source of clarity into a weapon of strategic immobilization. The X crisis continued to loom, unresolved, as decision-makers grappled not with the enemy's strength, but with the terrifying prospect that every piece of information they possessed had been carefully calibrated to ensure their inaction. The true cost of the data fog would only be determined much later, measured not in ordnance expended, but in opportunities lost while the command waited, agonizingly, for the fragmented truth to somehow coalesce.